presidential candidates like
We're going to get serious about ethanol.
Serious, they say, because ethanol is cleaner and renewable. It'll slow global warming and protect the environment. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John Edwards, and Jim Romney all want the government to subsidize the development of ethanol.
The economics of ethanol make more and more sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Well, if it made a lot of sense, we wouldn't have to subsidize it or mandate its consumption.
Jerry Taylor of the Cato Institute points.
Let's all have you come up with one question about the video that you'll turn in for some points here. Come up with one question.
So if ethanol were just better, so many people say, they wouldn't need your tax money to subsidize it.
You can make a profit in the market. They don't have any production.
But ethanol is worth subsidizing, say it's cheerleaders.
It's made from corn. We grow corn. It's more fun. Just makes it sound better. But it turns out that it takes just about as much to produce ethanol as you get when you burn ethanol. It takes a lot of fossil fuels to make the fertilizer, to run the tractor, to build the silo, to get that corn to a processing plant, to run the processing plant.
And ethanol cannot be moved in pipelines the way gasoline is because ethanol degrades. So using ethanol means using many more big polluting trucks
To move the corn from the fields to the processing plant, and then to move that corn ethanol from the Midwest to the coast. That takes a tremendous amount of energy.
So much so that a number of recent studies say making ethanol uses almost as much energy as ethanol creates.
Net energy balance is zero or less.
More bad news. The increased push for ethanol has led to a sharp increase in corn growing, which means much more land must be plowed. And that means much more fertilizer, much more water must be used on farms, and more pesticides. So why are politicians so in love with ethanol?
Almost every politician says this is a thing. It's no mystery that people want to be president and support the corn ethanol program. The first caucus is in the state of Iowa. And if you're not willing to sacrifice children to the corn god, you will not get out of the Iowa primary with more than 1% of the vote.
Hillary Clinton made 17 votes against ethanol until she started running for president.
Right now, the closest thing we have to a state religion in the United States is in Christianity is corn.
We are gathered here today to say amen to green fuels and ethanol.
One of many politicians saying amen is Senator Evan Bach in Indiana.
The alternative is just to continue to consume more and more oil, more and more gasoline. That's not good for us.
But the politicians make it seem like a free lunch. This would be using much more fertilizer, pesticides. This adds to greenhouse gases.
There's no panacea. There's no magic bullet. As we produce ethanol in more efficient ways, it will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
It's robbing Peter to pay Paul. And we are all Peter, and you, and the farmers in Indiana, are Paul. That's not fair.
You're currently being robbed to pay sheiks in the Middle East. Doesn't it make more sense to have Middle Western farmers producing America's fuel?
Make our dependence on Middle Eastern oil a thing of the past.
Many ethanol proponents say, even if it doesn't save energy, it'll reduce our dependence on foreign oil.
Oh, that's nonsense. There is simply no way we are going to reduce our dependence on foreign oil via ethanol.
A University of Minnesota study concluded that even turning all of America's corn into ethanol would be only 12% of our gasoline demand. This just helps you politicians and the people who make ethanol at everyone else's expense.
This is good for America. We have allowed our dependency on foreign petroleum to grow and grow and grow. That is not healthy for our country.
That's what we hear, plus lots of other wonderful reasons why we should love ethanol. But many of those reasons are myths.
It's not going to produce energy independence. It's not going to do none of those things. All it will do is make corn farmers richer, and companies like ADM who process ethanol a lot richer. Will make every one of us who aren't in that business poor. This is a naked transfer program designed to take money from people who buy corn and to give it to people who grow corn and people who make ethanol for it. That's all it is.
Okay. Food, illegal, everything. So come up with your question.
Lemonade for sale! Lemonade for sale! Stop all lemonade! Is everything illegal in America today?
All right. this one. This one I gotta show you just because it's incredible. Yeah, you guys know who Kobayashi is?
Yeah, the hot dog.
Alright, so this is him about ready to start with a piece of pizza. So I normally do this on the law of diminishing marginal utility.
He's so skinny. He does it. There's no way he chooses. He's like, yeah, he got it. Here, 2 seconds.
Less than a minute. That was the countdown. 56 seconds. All right, that was just bonus, but I use that one once in a while for the law of diminishing marginal utility. All right, so questions on ethanol. Does anybody want to volunteer what their question is? Yeah.
What would that, like, if we, made this more available, what would that mean for businesses that I work for, like KCs and things like that? How would that affect not only the workers, but the average person that may not have a lot of money, that may, have a little cost for that? You know what I mean?
And are you talking about if we didn't have the ethanol, or what? I'm just not quite tracking. Right now we had, in the past, we've had mandates, government law that said all gasoline has to have at least 10% ethanol. And so I don't know if that's what you're hitting on, if it wasn't there, or so I'm just trying to ask where you're coming, which side you're coming from.
Probably.
If it was gone.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the average person, what's happened is with the increase in the price of corn being used going up, it has brought up the price which gets fed to animals. So that's one effect, is the price of your meat, hamburgers, steaks, cattle, chicken, any animal that is kind of mass produced, if you will, in our supermarkets. That's caused their feed to go up, which then gets passed along to food. So I think that's one of the big effects that way. As far as working at a Casey's or something, probably wouldn't affect you too much in terms of your hours worked or anything like that. One of the main messages there was how that law really has gone to corn farmers in the form of higher prices, and that they've been able to get more. Okay. Any other questions? Anybody want to volunteer a question? All right, well, hold on to your papers for a second. Kyle, go ahead. Does the rise of ethanol truly make who poorer? Not associated with it, yeah. So the ethanol gains go to the ethanol producers and the other folks. So the people who would be getting hurt are the people who are getting substituted away from, right? So if they're producing that, then is there less gas being consumed or used? So that would be transfer away from that. So yes, that's where the harm would be. Okay. All right, hang on to those. I think we're going to do another video later, and I'm going to have you do a question thing there before we turn it in. So this, we're going to wrap up this externalities chapter today. So we were dealing with pollution and ways that government corrects it. In the video here, we were concerned about maybe energy independence and whatnot. What turns out to be kind of misleading on that whole energy independence thing is that oil is global. And so Canada is an exporter of oil. And so that's been one of their big things. So they're not using still all their own. It's not like somehow that benefits. It's just the world price of oil, whatever it is, if they start producing enough oil to where, in theory, I guess if the world would collapse on itself and world trade ended, then Canada would have enough oil to be self-sufficient on their own. But that's not even a relevant thing. I think we got other issues on our hand if world trade in oil ends or something. So what really happens is that those companies end up exporting oil to the rest of the world and make money on it. That's all it is. It's nothing special. So if your tax dollars in Canada had gone to oil producers, you're basically just helping them make money, right? And oftentimes those are rich people that own the oil companies. And so tax dollars from people who work at McDonald's, they pay their federal income tax to the Canadian government. The Canadian government gives a subsidy to the oil producers on the platform of, well, we're going to become energy independent, right, or whatever it is. And that's all that it effectively does, is it takes money from the poor and gives to the rich. Those are the things we want to try to avoid. And that's why we have this problem of cronyism, which I read through your guys' replies on that, and some of you didn't quite get that, so I thought that was worth bringing up again. The idea of cronyism is, you know what cronies, if you ever your friend a crony, or you heard that word, you probably, it's not the most contemporary word for your buddies, right? But, oh, it's a crony of mine, a buddy, a friend, right? So cronyism is big government, big business getting into bed with each other, more or less, right? So they are cronies with each other, so we call it cronyism. And so when we have politicians able to get large donations from various places that we'll hear more about on Wednesday night for the final debate, those sorts of issues are brewing pretty heavily in today's presidential race. We call that, the economists call that cronyism. And that ends up distorting the marketplace and the market prices. And we end up having big business getting bigger and bigger and big government getting bigger and bigger. And a lack of competition in general. Okay, so with pollution stuff here today, we're going to look at a story of a rancher and a farmer. Let's kick off today. So, oh, thank you. So we're going to do an example of an externality. So imagine we got a piece of land here, and we've got a rancher who owns a piece of this land, and we've got a farmer. So the farmer plants crops, and the rancher does cattle, right? So their plot of ground is kind of unusual that it looks like this. And so the farmer owns this piece, the rancher owns this piece, and then over the years there's just been this unusual piece of land that nobody really has a claim to, just kind of sitting out there in the middle. Sometimes this happens in real estate, where there's just nobody's cared for it, and over time what's happened is that the farmer has taken his crops and said, well, geez, that's kind of a waste that this isn't being planted, and so the farmer has their corn and started using it a little bit, right? Like, why not? Nobody seems to care. So for a number of years, the farmer, when he plants his crop, tends to go into that land. And then the rancher, likewise, has his cattle. There's my cow. And the cows tend to, nobody's really using that land, so the cows eventually kind of migrated over here too. All right? And so we've got cows running around on the land, as well as the farmer's crops being there. And, you know, the farmer kind of says, well, nobody's using it, I'll use it. Even if the cattle are there and they trample a little bit, no big deal. I still get some benefit out of it. And likewise, the rancher has a little bit more land for his cattle to roam around. Okay, so that's the setup that we have, and here's the problem. So this is again, this is kind of this nobody owns this little piece in the middle. And from an economist standpoint, we're kind of like, well, that seems like a waste that we have this trampling of crops, right? So the problem is some crop gets trampled. So there's a trample cost, if you will. A trample cost. And that seems like a waste of money, a waste of resources. And as we hopefully have come to appreciate in econ class, we like to keep waste down as much as possible. All right, so what are some potential solutions to the problem? Yeah, Ashley.
Raise cattle until the certain point that the corn will then be damaged permanently, and then you can cattle off, harvest the corn and use it back on the stalks.
So some sort of sharing arrangement. Who's going to do that? Who's going to coordinate all that? What you just described.
It's together, and it's a mutual agreement.
Okay, so the farmer and the rancher kind of come up with some sort of arrangement. Okay. What else? What's that? Split the land. Okay, so maybe we could just cut it up. And that would be another way. So maybe they can negotiate some sort of fairness of the cattle can use it at some periods and corn the others, or vice versa. Or we actually split the land. Right? Well, the problem with the auction, so who's gonna orchestrate that, I guess? Okay, local government. So maybe we have to put out some notices and it's unclaimed. And then how will we know if it's right, though? What troubles me a little bit is, do we have too much cattle or too much crop? Or not enough crop? You know, if we split it, will the reallocation be efficient? Which from our standpoint is correct, if you will. It'll maximize efficiency. Will it be allocatively efficient if we split it? So, in other words, does the government know that a 50-50 split, while it seems fair, is that the right amount to do? How would we know? That's kind of the challenge of this problem. It's not immediately obvious because it's kind of easy to go what seems to be fair. Of course, this is all assuming that whoever really does own the land has been tried to be reached, right? They've just ignored the land. Maybe somebody died and it was passed along from family and generations, and so we've tried to reach those people, and now we just have this common ground. Eva?
Would it be like which one is demanded?
Okay, yeah. So that's what I wanted to think about was, you know, which one is in higher demand? Which one is in higher demand? So maybe we could do some sort of research. The government could hire somebody and get into some cost and doing a little consulting and say, well, it seems like society needs more corn right now. You know, there's people are dying because of red meat. We certainly don't need any more cattle, right? According to research, and so let's give it all to the farmers so that we have more crops or something. So that might be the approach. So here's the interesting answer that Ronald Coase came up with in the 50s. He's the economist that posed this, and it leads to the Coase Theorem. What's awesome is that it doesn't really matter who gets the land in terms of economic efficiency. It doesn't matter who gets the land in terms of economic efficiency of getting the right amount of cattle versus the right amount of corn, as long as we have well-defined property rights. As long as we have well-defined property rights. So if cattle is in demand, high demand as Tabitha was saying. So cattle is high demand. I'll just leave it kind of generic. Right? So cattle prices are presumed high right now, right? Cattle, if you had a choice, you'd want to be in the cattle business, is basically what we're saying. If we give the land to the farmer and cattle demand is high, what is the farmer going to do? He's going to put cows on the land. His own cows for sure, or he could just do what? Rent it, right? So that producer surplus, the excess profit, if you will, if cattle's in demand, that means a lot of money's being made on that. Then all of a sudden the rancher is going to be willing to pay a nice rent for this piece of land because he's got plenty of money to do so. And if, especially if corn is down low or something at the time, then it's an easy decision for the farmer now to rent the land to the rancher. And so at the same time, if the rancher has all of the piece and cattle is in high demand, then he's just going to own it and he's going to put cattle on it, right? But if our case number one, case number two, relatively speaking, if crops are in high demand, and the land was given to the rancher, then the rancher's going to have incentive to rent it to the farmer, right? According to the incremental value that could be there. So if society values crops higher than cattle at the time, then there's going to be excess profits, if you will, in crops, which would cause the rancher to say, you know what, cows, we're not going to let you go over there. I can get more money by renting my land to the farmer because it's in high demand. And on the flip side, if we had given the crops, or if we had given the land to the farmer, then the farmer simply doesn't have a value of renting out the land. He can make more money putting it into crop because crops are in high demand, right? So the key ingredient here was well-defined property rights. From an economist perspective, the fairness in us wants to say, well, just split the land, that'll be fair. Turns out that'll work too, because the same arguments I just gave you, it won't matter if it's 50-50. We're still going to get the economic solution through negotiations and trade of one way or the other. But even better is if we screw up and we give it all to the farmer or we give it all to the rancher. As long as there's free trade, we're going to get the right answer. We're going to get the right amount of crop and the right amount of cattle through trade. Okay? So questions or comments on that? I'll write a few things out for you. So what we're touching on here is called the Coase Theorem. So the Coase Theorem, so Ronald Coase, one of my favorite economists, and approximately, I don't have it written down here, I think it was 1955, but let's just say the 1950s. He basically wrote this in an economics journal. Pretty much the same story I just gave you, and how things could be negotiated out. And the key is government intervention in this case was very small. One-time allocation, like you said, orchestrating the auction, by the way, that would be a fine way to do it. Or if the government stepped in and said 50-50, or the government possibly stepped in and said, give it to the rancher, give it to the farmer. It doesn't matter. And that's what was a powerful insight from Ronald Coase, because at the time, coming out of the New Deal and the Great Depression, government was starting to grow. The mentality of the United States was, we need government to fix free markets. Free markets cause problems sometimes in the allocation of scarce resources. And so let's have a government central planner come in and decide, well, looks like farming's in high demand, so we'll do this, right? And so maybe we pass a law, and then each year we go back to the table and pass a new law, and we talk about this, right? And it's always a city council discussion item of what the land's going to be this year. Well, we've kind of continued to let the government creep into the decisions. Oftentimes, they're probably going to make a decision anyway. And so the beauty of what Coase brought to the table was no government, just property rights. So we might need the government to allocate the property rights, but then you're done forever. You never have to open the book again, because these two parties over the next 150 years or whatever are going to simply negotiate the value of the land. As economic circumstances change, they're going to be able to negotiate that out. So Ronald Coase, 1950s, wrote what has now become the Coase Theorem. The Coase Theorem. Okay, and the Coase Theorem says that private negotiations of goods and services will be efficient as long as these three conditions are met. The first one is well-defined property rights. Agents, the private agents, have well-defined property rights. Well-defined property rights. So in a case like this, how many farmers do we have out there, or family farms, people connected to farming? In a case like this, what does it mean to have well-defined property rights? What does it mean? How do we get what I would call, or economists would call, well-defined property rights? How does that really come about in the market? What do we have with land? What do farmers have that would say, yeah, property rights are well-defined in farming? What's that? Sure, you could give an example, or how it played out for your family's property or whatever.
The general rule is when you stand at the halfway mark of your property, the right half is your fence. So that's half.
Okay. Okay, so
you have to keep it maintained. That's your property to keep up.
With the fence line.
Yes.
Okay. And where did the placement of the fence line come from? What supports that?
Surveyor.
What's that?
Surveyor.
A surveyor. That's right. Right. So in the United States, one of the greatest things that was done, Jefferson, back when the country started, was to have the whole United States surveyed. So there's an amazing survey system where the whole country was essentially, here's the United States, the whole country was essentially split into these areas, and each rectangle represents a spot of land in the United States based off of lines of latitude and longitude. And so everything is anchored to that. Everything is anchored to that system that we began way back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So everything was surveyed so that we had well-defined property rights. Now we can go to public record, and if there was a transaction and the Romigs bought this piece of land in Kansas, that can be tied back to exactly that parcel, whatever it is. And ultimately, you can hire a surveyor, if somebody was, if this guy started getting a little aggressive and was kind of encroaching over here, ultimately you can hire a surveyor to prove that he is on your land, because the surveyor will come out with those little stakes and mark your land, and that's your exact property line according to the system that was adopted. So we have property very well defined, and that is something that's lacking in a lot of poor countries. So a lot of poor people in other countries have a house, and their grandma and their grandma's grandma have lived at this particular place, but they don't have this. And so they can never really use it as collateral, for instance, for a loan if they want to start a business or something. Their house that they've been living at, they actually don't have any property rights to it. Yes, they've been living there, but the government doesn't have a system for them to actually utilize some of their assets, and one of those is property especially. So very difficult to start a small business, for instance, because you don't have collateral that could be used to maybe start a small business loan. And so a lot of underdeveloped countries have this problem of lacking well-defined property rights, and that's part of what holds them back from prospering. There's an economist named DeSoto that's done some amazing work on identifying that around the country. And so slowly but surely, as governments start to get their act together, or possibly there's an overthrow of the current dictator or whatever the case is, if they get somebody in there and do some consulting with economists, this is one of the early things that they would do, is try to define property rights well. Okay, questions or comments there? So well-defined property rights. Cars. What do you got for cars? Your car title. That's defining that you own it, right? So you've got that. If you buy something at the store, you have your sales receipt that ends up giving kind of your proof of purchase so that people can do that. In addition to that, we need, on top of that, we have well-defined property rights, but we need a government to enforce those property rights. So if your crap gets stolen, you can call the police. There's a police report. Ultimately, they find the person who stole it. You can sue them. You go to a judge, and you sue them for that amount. That's all absolutely paramount to a market system working well, is to have these well-defined property rights. All right, so if we have well-defined property rights, that's a good step to creating a problem. All right, the other thing we need is a small number of agents. A small number of agents. So if there's an externality that exists, it might become really difficult if there's a large number of people affected by it. So last time when we did the pollution example, way back on Wednesday, I know it was a long time ago already, we had, what was it, a beer manufacturer or something? Somebody was making beer, was it? Is that the example I used? Big clouds of smoke are billowing down to the, maybe it's a city of 100,000 people, and some kids are having a third eyeball or whatever, getting coughing and sneezing and whatever, getting sick, right? So it might be difficult for 100,000 people to negotiate the property rights. So that might be hard to do. First of all, pollution, the air doesn't have well-defined property rights, right? I mean, it's not something that's easy to define. And furthermore, we've got a large number of agents. So even if there was property rights, it might be difficult for them to negotiate it out. And then finally, we have low transactions costs. Low transactions costs. If the rancher and the farmer live in different places, and the only way they could do it was to get together face to face, and one guy lives in India, and the other guy lives here, and so it's a $1,500 flight to get there, and it's kind of a pain in the rear end just to travel 20 hours to get to one, right? The transaction cost for them to be able to negotiate, hey, should you get the land, should I get the land? If we have high transactions costs, then that can cause this deal to fall apart too, right? So we need to have low transactions costs for us to get this efficient solution. So what boils down to what was very powerful about Coase's theorem is that if we have these three things, then we're going to get an efficient solution. And so in many circumstances, issues that come up, problems with the marketplace, might be able to be handled by assigning property rights. So the example I gave you last time was the cap and trade with the carbon monoxide being spewed onto the atmosphere, right? Before that, we didn't have property rights. But now we've defined the right to pollute. We've created a property right that can now be tradable. And so now we have the government out of the way if we had well-defined property rights. And it's clean air. That's it. One of the issues there is that there's potentially a large number of agents that would be impacted by pollution, but the idea with cap and trade was that we were going to cap pollution where it is. The problem pollution is in the future if it continued to go where it was. So we're going to kind of freeze pollution at its current levels, and so now we're talking these big companies that would be small enough for them to engage in trade on it, right? And transactions cost $10 million transaction, and maybe there's an internet hookup and a registration fee and some sort of thing. But relatively speaking, traders who are interested in carbon monoxide can trade with each other at fairly low cost relative to the size of the deal. All right, so that is Coase. All right, so let me put the conclusion then for our thing. The key point all right, so key we may be able to keep government out of the picture long term if we can define property rights and allow trading. And so the key point number 2 from this, it doesn't matter who you give the property to. It does not matter who gets the property. That's a big finding. It does not matter who gets the property. Trading among owners over time gets us QAE, the allocatively efficient quantity. I think I usually ask a question about this one on the final exam. Whoa, look at this thing. What's going on here? What can you do? Sure what that sucker was. Some sort of small animal died on the chalkboard here.
So how is this example externality? What is the externality?
Okay, so the externality was this is really a tragedy of the commons. So it's a different version of this. So a lot of these, there was an external cost to society that was going on due to the lack of property rights. In fact, let me do a quick graph of this. Let's do cattle. And the value of cattle, marginal cost, marginal benefit. This is good to do anyway. So right the market value of cattle is at P1 and Q1. Just going back to our home base, right? All right. So society's cost lies above the private cost of the rancher who owns the cattle because of the trample cost. So the externality is this vertical distance between the social cost and the private cost. In this case, that's the trample cost. On the benefit side, hopefully the people who are eating the red meat don't have any positive externality or there's not any external benefit that's missing. And so our baseline assumption is that private benefits equal social benefits. Allocative efficiency occurs where social costs equal social benefits at the margin. That's right here. And so the allocatively efficient quantity is less than what the market's producing. So that kind of puts us back into the context. All right. Now, where this is a little tricky is how did this change then if we gave the land to the rancher? If we give the land, so the answer to the question is, and remember we talked about taxes last time, that maybe the government could say, well, let's come in, do tax, drive up the price, drive up the quantity, right? Get rid of, that was one of our solutions we looked at was for the government. But in this case, all we're going to do is give the rancher the land. What happens? Yeah, that's what I mean. Would his costs go down? Now, this is his cost, though, right now. This is part of the problem. His costs are here. The benefit of selling is here. The demand, the price. So this is a little bit slippery. If I give the rancher the land, how do we get this being the answer? How do we get it being the answer? How does he take into account the trample costs? And go back to, I already erased it here, but what if farming, if crops were in high demand, he'll rent the land. So if he doesn't rent the land, it's his opportunity cost. Very good, whoever said that, right? So what we've done is we've internalized the externality again. Now the trample costs are his costs, essentially, because he could be renting out the land. So once that happens, when we have property rights, then we get his cost turns into MC1 from MC0, or I'll use 1 and 2. So this is 1, goes up to 2. So with this, he has the opportunity cost of renting the land has now been internalized, and so he's going to take that into account. Another way to think about it is that cattle prices have to be this high for it to be advantageous for him to do it, right? Cattle prices have to be in high demand for him to justify not renting out the crops, right? Think about it that way. Cattle demand has to be high in order for him to justify not renting it out. So that opportunity cost has been internalized. Okay, questions? You guys got a question, or is it more of just graphing out? What is it? Are you doing? Oh, tell me if it is. Is it related or?
No.
It's not related. Okay. Well, then, they're doing soccer or something. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Positioning today on today's game. Okay. All right. Well, remember, as long as the phone doesn't ring, you guys can look on my syllabus. If side talk happens, then I may tell you to shut up, but you're not going to lose any points. Yes?
This is going to be on the 10%.
Yeah, this is potentially game for the final. Any of our notes, well, notes in general are usually a good source for the material on the final. Any other questions? Okay, because that's kind of a little sleight of hand there that gets us some neat options. All right, let's see. We need to talk about the tragedy of the commons, which is kind of what this one is touching on. Did anybody still, were you guys writing this still? Sorry. I can stop you on. You weren't still doing this, I hope, right? Well, you can review the tape later, I guess. Yeah. Yes, I did hit record this time, so it is going. All right. So this next example deals with ocean fish. Ocean fish, yes. So in general, we call this problem the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons. All right, maybe you guys have seen this happen. How do the hallways in your dorms look at the end of a weekend? How do those look? Dependent for flooded. Good. Yeah, that was a different type of tragedy, not so much of the comments. But at the end of the weekend, ever find wrappers or cans crushed or a little bit of sticky floor? Yeah. And how did that compare to inside your dorm? Where do you have better incentive to keep track of things a little bit more? Inside or in the common? Neither one, maybe? So I had this problem quite a bit. I can't remember if I mentioned it, but we had about 800 apartment units right across the street from Iowa State University. And so I was pretty heavily involved in college student housing. And so weekend after weekend, there'd be puke, or there'd be poop, or there'd be spit, or there'd be barf, or whatever. I guess I said barf and puke, the same thing. But, you know, the common areas would get trashed on the weekend in a major way, in a fairly costly way, too, in addition to it just being gross. So we had to try to come up with different ways to alleviate that. So, let's put that example here. So hallways in apartments or dorms compared to your unit. Now, while some of you, it sounded like maybe keep kind of a trashy looking room, for the most part, I assume that we have some, I've never looked at Ottawa's, but it'd be pretty standard to have some sort of checkout procedure. You guys have to have the room in a certain condition when you leave it, right? And if you don't, then what happens? Then you get charged, right? So there's a fee there. But of course, nothing like that really happens in the hallways because nobody owns it. You guys all use it, but there's no private ownership other than, of course, the landlord or whoever has it there, but as far as there's a mismatch of who uses it and who has to take care of it. All right, so the problem is nobody owns it. we'll put that in parentheses here. Owns it in the sense of somebody does own that property, but nobody owns it to the point where they have an incentive to take care of it. And so the key point here is that there's an absence of incentives to prevent overuse and abuse. Overuse and abuse and depletion of commonly owned resources. And so this is the tragedy of the commons, is this absence of incentives to prevent overuse and abuse and depletion of commonly owned resources. So natural resources are one of the items that you found on your matrix when we talked about non-rivalry and non-excludability, right? So we had rivalry. If I puke on the carpet, that takes away from your enjoyment of the carpet, right? So the hallway common carpet has some rivalry to it, potentially, in that sense. But I can't exclude people very easily. All the owners in the apartment building, even if you have a locked door access, can let in visitors and other people, right? So it's hard to exclude people. And that's a lot of times was the claim, not always, by the way, but most of the time we found over the years that it was the people who lived there, their guests that would come over and trash it, right? They're having a party, have a few friends over, and it was their guests that would end up causing the problems. So as cameras and whatnot developed, then we could track guests. That person left your apartment, went down into the stairway and puked their guts out, $20. You know, or $50 or whatever. In other words, you were responsible for your guests, whether they were wanted or unwanted. And so we tried to change the property rights and responsibilities of the tenants that way. So that can evolve over time due to changes in technology. All right, so natural resources are the ones that kind of are keyed in on here. So habitats for animals, so hunting and fishing, and in general, just use of nature, hunting, fishing, water quality, air quality. They all kind of fall into this category of, all right, good luck. Fall into these categories where we're going to have this tragedy of the commons issue potentially. All right, so the example I want to go, I guess this really wasn't the example. Well, I guess that was an example. Example number 2 is cod fish in the ocean. This is an example that your book goes through, so I think it's an interesting enough example to look at a little bit closer. Because many species, what are some animals that are on the endangered list nowadays? What's that? Pandas. Pandas, yeah. Pandas is one. Tigers. Owls. Rhinos. Elephants. Some elephant species, yeah, some of them are starting to come back. But we have this going on all the time, right? That we have sharks with shark fin soup and sharks being cut for just their fin only and then thrown back to sea. So we've got this problem of they're being able to identify ownership. So cod, and then there's other fish. You guys had some tilapia at the restaurants. That's good. So what I've noticed over time since I started doing this was like cod was one of the main fish in like the 70s and 80s. Like all of the your fish sticks, kids' fish sticks, it was all cod, and cod was kind of the popular thing, similar to like tilapia is now, and then sometimes there'd be red snapper. And so you see these trends come through. Maybe you've already seen this in your young lives already, of like there's this new fish that, oh, everybody, you got to try sea bass. Sea bass was another one before. And so what happens is these fish become in high demand, and then of course they go get fished, and they get overfished, and the stock of fish depletes, right? Kind of this standard natural resource story. And so what we want to look at for starters is what is a sustainable production. Sustainable production with fish. So I like to think of my kind of bucket theory with this one. So imagine we've got all these little fishies on here fishing around in our pool. There they are, some little ones, some big ones, right? So we have a certain level, a certain stock of fish out in the lake, out in the ocean, whatever it is. We've got a certain stock of natural resources with these animals. And there's a spigot here with a full. How does that bucket get bigger over time? How does the spigot, what's coming out of that little faucet? Fish. And so how is that happening? Yeah, natural reproduction. Now that can be also man-made, right? If we start having fishing ponds where we're forcing the production process, but we basically just have the birth rate, right? So this is the reproduction rate. Reproduction or birth rate, which could be natural, could be man-made. Some animals aren't kept in captivity very well, right? So you can't, it's not as easy as, oh, why don't we just bring them to the zoo and we'll start making little babies of these owls. Well, sometimes they freak out when they're in captivity or whatever, so you can't do that with everything. With fish, it's oftentimes easier to have them mass produced in these fisheries, but not always. So reproduction of some sort. And then we've got a hole in our bucket, and that, of course, is the harvest, right? How much are we harvesting or death? Again, this could be due to natural causes, but in what we're looking at with using these fish for food is the harvest rate. So how many fish are we taking out versus how many are being born? It's pretty simple, right? If the harvest rate is greater than the reproduction rate, what happens to the bucket level? It goes down. And if the reproduction rate is greater than the harvest rate, the bucket level rises. And so what is a sustainable production? What would be sustainable? Reproduction equals harvest, right? Now, that would be choosing some level of optimal amount here, right? And so if we go to marine biologists and other people who study this stuff, it turns out that there might be an optimal stock of fish that has the natural reproduction process going in bigger amounts. So it might not be as one thing to say reproduction equals harvest. Doesn't matter if the water level's here or the water level's here. It turns out that might be determined to some degree on what the optimal amount of stock of fish is, because some of those tuna, some of those fish travel around in large schools, and when they're in large schools, there's more activity, access to food, and they mate better or whatever, right? So we'll have marine biologists kind of study that, but once we have that level, then we're kind of some easy math of how many are we producing versus the harvest rate, and we can maintain that level. Okay, so with cod, I'm gonna show something from your book here. Oops. And how technology can change. Okay, so here's what happened with cod. Kind of a progression over time. This is way back from 1850, right? So 1850, we've got fish landing thousands of tons per year, and then of course over time. And so we have that continuing to grow, and then we get this new technology, sonar technology, finding, you know, how many people have been fishing and you got the fish finder. I mean, those things are so awesome right now with what they can do and what you can see. And so once that happened, boom, we can put ourselves right on top of the cod and net them all up. So we had new net technologies, and all of a sudden we're wiping out the cod in a fairly short order. And so then they ended up putting a ban on cod so that there was no cod fishing at all here in the 1990s, coming close to being extinct, with the idea that if we stop the harvest rate, we're going to allow that bucket level to fill up. And now cod levels are getting back up to good amounts. You can still buy cod now. It's in a much more controlled environment. But that's part of the problems we see with these common areas. And so we want to try to figure out, is there something that we can do? What they've done with cod is called an individual transferable quota. So what was a quota again? Quota was what? A limit, just a limit on fish. Hey, you can only do X amount of fish. Now, if you're a fisherman, one way to do that might be to do a little cronyism. Go to your politician, say, hey, you know, I'll give you half of my catch if you allow me to be the one company that gets to go out and get all the fish. Oh, that sounds like a great idea, right? So that person gets all the quotas. Or we have a fixed amount and kind of first come, first serve. Whoever can get the fish and bring them back, then that's what we have. Or we can say, everybody can only do 100. So if you guys are all my individual fish producers, here's 100, a little permit that allows you to do 100, 100, 100. And then we add up the room, and if there's 40 people in here, 40 times 100 is 4,000. We've limited the amount of fish, right? You can fill that permit. How many of you have done permits for like deer hunting and stuff like that, right? So you can have a limit on the number of fish, or you can issue these permits. Well, with commercial fishing, where they're doing massive amounts, they use this permit system where you can do this amount and this amount. Okay. Then they added on this provision that they can be transferable. Now here's where we get into the economists thinking about efficiencies. If I just pass out the permits randomly, what could be the problem in terms of efficiency for society? Some people might not use them. Some people might not fill them, potentially, because they suck at fishing, right? So the suck people, and then there's the LeBron James fishing, right? I mean, that group always fills their, you know, they are awesome. They are so efficient. They've got the latest, greatest technology. You know, they know how to get fish done. So we've got the suck people and the LeBron James people all getting treated fairly, right? You get 100, you get 100, you get 100. Now, we've already talked about government not being very good at that. And in fact, some susceptible to people with more money kind of bribing their way or lobbying their way to getting favorable treatment, right? So we know that that's not a good system. So how can we overcome that? We allow marketability of those permits. So now I'm going to go 100, 100, 100, 100, 100, 100. But I'm going to allow those permits to be traded. They're going to be marketable. They can be traded among people. Tell me what's going to go on between the LeBron James fishermen and the suck fishermen. They're going to sell, right? The suck people are like, you know, they'll eventually figure it out. They're like, oh, let's go fishing again. You know, this kind of sucks. This equipment's pretty expensive. Marine stuff, fishing stuff, it's all really expensive. And if they're not making money at it, and they're holding on to this permit, they're like, maybe it'd be better to stay on the couch and sell this to LeBron James, right? So LeBron James buys it from the suck person. And now we have those permits with a market value. And LeBron is not going to buy them unless he believes he can make money off of it, right? So now, as long as the price isn't fixed by the government, we're going to allow that permit price to fluctuate. I don't know if it's $10 or if it's $1,500. It's just like any other good we buy, right? So the suck fisherman's going to be deciding, how much am I willing to sell this for to stay at home and still make money? LeBron's over here thinking, man, I know we can make a killing. I'd be willing to buy some stuff, somebody's permit, and we've created that marketplace again. And whatever that difference is, that's going to be negotiated according to their skills. So here's the picture that we can think about from the book. I'll save you from me drawing this again. So currently, we have overfishing, right? So the marginal private cost equals the marginal private benefit, which is now the social benefit, right? So we're not thinking there's any sort of external effect there. And so there's too much fishing going on. We restrict the permits so that we only have X amount of permits out there, because marine biologists and other people have determined that if we have this many being caught, we've reached that sustainable level, right? So we've kind of optimized, done all the engineering of that. 300 is the optimal level. We divvy out the permits. It actually doesn't matter who we give them to, because we're going to allow them to be traded and marketable. And so now we've got the suck producers and the good producers able to trade those things. And this distance here represents the amount of that tradable permit, right? This is going to be the market value, ultimately, after all the dust settles, that the permit's going to be paying. This is LeBron James. LeBron's marginal cost of the 300 fish is here. The marginal benefit is up here. So LeBron's going to pay this amount to the suck fishermen and still go fishing. And now we've got LeBron out there, the LeBrons of the world, the best fishermen, those who are best at it there. And hopefully the suck fishermen aren't sitting on the couch, by the way, but they've listened to their opportunity cost and they're doing what they're most productive at, because it turned out relatively speaking, their comparative advantage wasn't in fishing. They were better at something else, little did they know, relative to some other fishermen that were out there. Okay. Questions on that one at all? So, again, what we did here is we said, do we have to have the government involved? Answer, maybe. But does it have to be in the traditional ways that we thought of, that they have to just say, sorry, no more fishing, 300, that's it, right? Maybe there's a better way, because that's going to turn out not to get us at the lowest price possible. And we go to a market system. We go back to Coase. We identify property rights. We allow those things to be traded. And as long as transactions costs are low and the number of agents is small enough, then we can have a market solve the problem rather than the government really solving the problem. A market exchange is going to solve the problem. Looking for market solutions rather than government solutions. That is something that, especially as technology changes in this world, you guys, that is the direction we need to go. We have so much opportunity. We're just scratching the surface. I think I told you about Uber before, and I did this again when I was in Atlanta at my conference. I was able to hit the ride pool thing. And so Uber, you guys, how many have used Uber? Just a handful. Okay. I've talked about Uber in here, haven't I? Okay. So you get on your app, and it's private people driving around, right? It's a market transaction that's facilitated by technology in ways that we could never do before. We always had to have the taxi company, right? So for a large number of years, we call the taxi company. The taxi company has his army of taxi drivers. They send somebody out to get you. Now, through technology and GPS and all the other things that come along with it, we are one-on-one talking to a driver. We've eliminated the middleman. Technology, Uber is not a taxi company. Uber is a company that provided an app that allows a buyer and a seller to work directly with each other. Same thing with Airbnb. Who's heard of that? How many people have stayed at an Airbnb? Nobody yet. You've got a house. Maybe it's a second house. Not necessarily, though. You can rent out rooms. Airbnb has an app. I want to stay in, whatever, Florida, near Disney World. Go to Airbnb, and somebody's not there, let's say, for the next month because they're traveling out of the country or something. They put their house up on the market. They've got it registered. There's all the checks and balances. and safety mechanisms in place, a rating system similar to eBay, and you go stay at their house. And you might stay at their house. They call it Airbnb because, like a traditional bed and breakfast, a lot of people live there and they've got extra rooms in their house. And so you're just going to rent out a room of theirs and maybe get breakfast, maybe not. It's all described site. Again, peer-to-peer markets where we're putting a buyer and a seller directly together. We've got so many opportunities like that in today's day and age with the new technology that in many cases we don't need the government to maybe give the blessing on whether that house is safe, right? That the hotel has a license and then we feel better. Well, maybe some people are willing to take the risk. Maybe there is a little bit more risk of doing Airbnb versus staying at the Marriott, right? But if somebody knows that risk, if they're aware of it, but there's the system and they start to be comfortable with the checks and balances that are in place with the Uber or with the Airbnb, and they make that choice, isn't that what freedom is all about in the land of liberty? That we get to make our own choices. We have to live with the consequences, perhaps, but we have that opportunity. We don't have to have the government defining the goods and services that we get to have. We can do that through technology and creativity and the human mind to come up with some interesting ideas. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, let me write a little bit of this out with the individual transferable quota. Let's see. All right. Okay, so what do we leave off with here in writing? We got cod in the ocean, sustainable production. Let's go steps here. Need to limit cod harvest. Number 2, government issues. So we do need a government here. We're likely to put this together initially. Government issues individual transferable quota permits. So we call those ITQs permits. So it's like a quota that we talked about before, but it's a little different. Individual transferable quota, ITQ permits. Okay, so suck fisherman, fisherwoman, I don't know how to do that on gender, yeah, fisher ladies out there. So suck fishermen and LeBron fishermen can trade / sell. That's what they're doing. Let me just put buy sell. Suck fishermen and LeBron fishermen can buy sell ITQs. So, from society's viewpoint, low-cost fishermen, that's the LeBron fishermen, low-cost fishermen will buy permits from high-cost fishermen, the suck ones. Therefore, society's resources get allocated to the best spot. Number 5, the price of the ITQ will be equal to the external cost, which is the same result we've been getting with all of these problems. But what we're getting away from is there being a tax and then having the government in between. So the price of the ITQ permit will be equal to the external cost. Number 6, no government needed to establish the European tax. I'll throw that one back at you. Remember, old Pagoo was the one that said, set the tax equal to the external cost. Now we're just going to let the market, through buying and selling behavior, establish the external cost. All right. Any last questions on that? Did I wrap up all the summary points? Okay, so our next and last chapter is on resource markets. So I think what we're going to do is watch a short video here that you guys can add another question onto. So many good ones here. Let's see, let's see. You know, I think one that I'm going to do first, we're going to do a few different ones, but how many of you heard about the gender gap in pay? We're talking about resources, so gender gap in pay. Who gets paid more, men or women? Okay, how much? 30%, probably close to right, depending on what statistics you use. But that number is grossly distorted because it's not right to kind of compare apples and oranges and call it the same way. The way that that statistic gets brought out is often distorted. So we're going to watch a short video on that and see what you think here.
Another contemporary economic myth is that women make 75 cents for every dollar men make because they're discriminated against in labor markets.
Just got a little buffering here. Hopefully. See the little thing going. There we go. All right, so come on.
Economic myth is that women make 75 cents for every dollar men make because they're discriminated against in labor markets. Like other myths, this does have a little truth. So, for example, if you add up all the incomes of women and divide by the number of women in the labor force, they do the same thing for men.
Oh, geez.
Well, the fact is, on average, women do make about 75% of what men do. What's happening here is not discrimination with income things.
Let me let it do a little buffering here. Hopefully we'll get it.
The differences in the choices that men and women make about investing in their knowledge, their education, their skills, and their job experience that lead to them getting paid different salaries. Economists talk about people's human capital.
She usually doesn't do this.
The Wi-Fi's been really bad here today.
Has it?
Yeah, this morning it wasn't even working.
And I don't know if this will make a difference. I don't think it does. Go a little bit smaller. But...
Capital, you mean the knowledge, the skills, the education, and the job experience that people have. And economics argues that people get paid wages according to that human capital. It turns out that men and women invest very differently in human capital. We can see that in 4 different ways.
Oh, HD, yeah, thank you. Good idea. See, how do I do that? Put this one. Do 720?
Yeah.
Or is that what it was on?
That's what it was on.
All right, we'll do 360.
Usually they hear it anyway.
First of all, educational choices.
Oh, yeah.
Men, for example, tend to go into fields like engineering. Women tend to go into social sciences, into psychology, into nursing. And so where men are making higher salaries as engineers or perhaps in the business world, women tend to end up in jobs in which their salaries are somewhat lower. So even though they may have the same years of schooling, the different choices they've made about their majors lead to them working in different areas and getting paid differently. Secondly, men and women have different expectations about work. For example, if women expect down the road to take time off to raise children, they'll make different choices today about what kinds of skills they acquire than if they imagine they'll be working full-time for the rest of their lives. And we know historically that many women in the 1960s and 70s didn't imagine that they would be working full-time at age 40 and ended up making choices that led them to have jobs where they were working at age 40 that didn't pay as well as they might have otherwise. Today, of course, are more likely to imagine themselves working at age 40 and therefore make different investments today. Another difference between men and women is full versus part-time work. Women are much more likely than men to work part-time, men are more likely to work full-time. And part-time work, even for the same kinds of jobs, tends to pay less than full-time work. And women tend to prefer part-time work more than men. Women still tend to take on the majority of the responsibility for children. Finally, men and women differ in terms of their tenure on a job and the way in which their careers get interrupted. If it's the case that women take time off from the workforce to raise children, that will have an impact on their salaries down the road. So we put these 4 things together, what we get is that the difference between men and women's pay is not a result of labor market discrimination, but of the choices that men and women make before they enter the labor market, or even when they're in the labor market, about the kinds of jobs they want to have and the way they want to balance family and work. Studies that have tried to control for all these factors have shown that when a man and a woman, same experience, same education, same job, and compare their salaries, what you find is that women make about 98% of what men do. So that gender wage gap pretty much disappears. And in some jobs, women actually make more. Now, it might well be the case that women are being discriminated against or that sexism is a problem in the choices that women make. For example, girls are guided away from math classes and guided into other kinds of classes. It's also certainly the case that our expectations about women's roles versus caring for children in the household, men's roles about caring for children in the household are very different. If we think those are poor choices, if we want to see women's pay more equal to men, what we need to do is convince more women to go into areas such as the sciences and mathematics and engineering, and we need to convince men to take more responsibility for children in the house. When those begin to even out, we'll see wages begin to even out as well. But in the meantime, whatever choices men and women make, the wages they're paid in the market will reflect the productivity associated with those choices and are not a result of discrimination.
Okay, so what you got for questions on this one? You believe it, or is that a bunch of muckety muck? Let me before I take your question, let me give you a. I just saw one of the presentations that went on at this conference I was at. They did, to kind of test for that, this was a little more recent study, single women without kids. If you look at those 2 pays, so you take an industry, look at single women without kids versus men in the labor force, and you come up with this 96, they were almost 97% on that as well. So there still might be a little bit, but it's not this 30%, 25-30% gap Hillary said it last time. I suspect she'll bring that up again in the debates, that equal pay for equal work. It's just not true when you look at the data taking into account different factors, that there maybe is some underlying choice with that. All right, so let me go to your questions. What do you got? Anybody want to volunteer? What's that? Yeah, and you're turning it in. This is part of your credit today, so have your question.
So they're saying that the reason the wage is different is because women choose like different jobs.
Yes.
Lower pay.
That was part of it. So, you know, some people might argue that on, well, why is it? And he brought it up. He didn't say it real strongly, but are women in positions that are less STEM oriented? How many of you have heard of STEM? Science, technology, engineering, and math, right? Are women less in those industry, or in those, less interested and less in those areas because of our K through 12 education, or because of our culture that says, you're a little girl, why don't you go read and talk to babysit the other kids? You're a boy, and I'm of course being grossly overly simplified here, but you're a boy, do some math problems, right? Does this get somehow ingrained into us in our K through 12 education? Because that is something that they're trying to address now. So I'm actually going to give a talk to some kindergarten or grade schoolers on the first week in November at Garfield Elementary. I did this one other time. They're trying to get people to come in and talk to kids about STEM. Now this one's specifically targeting girls, but that issue's been brought up as to whether we're, even when presenters are there. I've talked to the head of the United Way, Meg Pearson, and she said she's noticed that on some of the presenters, that when somebody's presenting, they might look more at the boys in a completely unintentional way, but just naturally when they're talking about something technical or mathy or something, that they'll tend to gaze their attention more to the boys than to the girls. And so do we have these implicit biases that we have that have created the outcome, or is it a nature-nurture thing? That are women naturally more interested in relational type stuff and less in quantitative stuff or whatever, math stuff? I don't know. Those are interesting questions.
My aunt, she's a financial advisor for Everjones, and she's really into like reading about the difference between men and female. And she said that she found that men will take a job that they feel 60% qualified for, and then will wait till they're 100% qualified.
Yes, there's some of those. I've seen some studies. Did you guys hear what Kylie said there? Yeah. So that men tend to be more risk takers, basically, and women want to be more certain. These, again, are generalities, don't apply to everybody, right? So bear with me, but they found that that can be the case too, that you want to be a little more sure and have more certainty, and so there's less risk taking. I've seen a similar thing with negotiations, that women tend to not be as aggressive on pay, whereas men will tend to ask for raises, negotiate stronger on the front end. All of those are skills that you guys can, you know, try to develop on your own and bring to the labor market that can help you on that. But we're not even talking, and that, to me, with the studies that you just saw, when they narrowed the gap to 98 to 97, 78, taking all these other factors into account, we're down to that type of thing, where maybe the rest of the difference is some of these factors. But once you control for education and you control for these other things that they did, that gap tends to go away. And in fact, I've seen some other, they didn't do it on this video, but there is other industries where women are paid more. That it's not true across the board. There are industries where women are paid higher on average than men. Not as many of them, of course, but there are industries where women are paid higher than men.
I think maybe a lot of it is really because I think a lot of which corporations they're looking for, like for all the cases stores here in town, all the managers are women. Our regional managers are women. Like,
oh,
we don't have a lot of upper management.
Well, and certainly over time, people have wanted to infuse that. Maybe they've sometimes become aware of their biases that were funded at the time or whatever. And so I think people are more cognizant of that. I mean, I for one would love to see a woman president, just not this time around. I think we are overdue, but and that's strictly unpolitical. They both suck. Yes, that's right. Yes. All right, we'll see you on Wednesday.
Can we just go to the
Yes, turn in your sheets.